Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Shakespeare and Company, and welcome back after a small break in events. I hope you've all had very relaxing, pleasant summers, and it's nice to see so many of you show up for this, our first event of the autumn season. And what an event it is. We are delighted to welcome Gaël Faye to Shakespeare and Company tonight. When, as readers, we're introduced to 10-year-old Gabrielle, the narrator of Gaël Faye's magnificent debut, Small Country, we encounter the pretty normal childhood of a pretty normal kid, as much as any kid can ever be described as normal. Growing up in Burundi with a French father and Rwandan mother, Gabrielle, or Gabby, has a group of close friends who live on his street, a new red BMX, a cute little sister, and even a French pen pal, Laure. It's no surprise then that on the evening of he celebrated his 11th birthday, and despite recent turbulence both in his family and in the country at large, Gabrielle is able to reflect with some confidence that, deep down, he knew that everything would turn out all right. But this is Burundi in the early 1990s, and anybody with a little knowledge of that region of the world at that point in history knows that everything would not turn out all right. Far, far from it. As national elections lead to political crises, and political crises lead to the opening of old divisions between the Tutsi and Hutu populations in both Burundi and Rwanda, Gabi is forced not only to watch his world disintegrate around him, but also, and despite his resistance, to take sides. The power of Small Country lies both in the breathtaking elegance of Gaël Faye's writing, exquisitely translated here by Sarah Arizzoni, and the authenticity of the narrator's child's eye view. Alongside Gabby, we're drawn to reflect on the forces and the choices that drive people apart, that make neighbour turn upon neighbour, and how the seeds of catastrophe can be sown without us even realising. Gaël Faye is an author, composer and hip-hop artist. He was born in 1982 in Burundi. In 1995, after the outbreak of civil war and the Rwandan genocide, his family moved to France. Gaël studied finance and worked in London for 2 years before returning to France to embark on a career of writing and music. His first solo album, 2013's Pili Pili sur un croissant au beurre, was recorded between Bujumbura and Paris, and is filled with a plethora of musical influences, rap laced with soul and jazz, semba and Congolese rumba. In 2018, he received the prestigious Victoire de la Musique Award. Small Country is Gaël Faye's first novel. It won him the Prix Goncourt des Lycéens in 2016 and is being published in 30 countries across the world. The Sunday Times called Small Country an excellent novel, a model of restraint and quiet literary sophistication. Publishers Weekly described it as precise and potent, deeply affecting. While writing in The Guardian, novelist Nadifa Mohammed declared, "This is a book that demanded to be written." Please join me in welcoming Gaël Faye to Shakespeare and Company. Welcome. It's great to have you here. I suppose where I'd like to begin is where the book really begins with Gabrielle, with Gabby, with his perspective, and it's a first person narrative. So we're with Gabby through the duration of the story, and I suppose I'm curious to know why, first of all, when you decided to tell this story, that you decided to tell it from the perspective of a 10, 11-year-old child.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you to be here. I start to write from a child perspective, but there is also an adult perspective.
Which I want to talk to you about later.
Yeah. I try both. Mm-hmm. But at the end, I think there were something more poetic mm-hmm. in the voice of and the view of a child, mm-hmm. and it's the reason why. Because at the beginning, the two parts, the adult voice and the child voice, were equal mm-hmm. in the first version of the book. But I decided just to take the child voice because it was more poetic and you know, when you are shy you don't try to find a solution, mm-hmm. and this perspective was much more interesting for me.
And you don't try to find a solution, and you don't try to find an excuse either, I think, as well.
An excuse to the violence of the war, an excuse to the war, an excuse of ethnicity. Yeah.
And there's definitely a clarity to the vision of Gabi, one which maybe when people get older, when they become adults, they might explain certain actions and excuse certain actions.
Yeah.
And maybe there's a reason for explaining and excusing them. But there's something really powerful, I found, about seeing these issues in the way a child would think about them, which, as I said, has a clarity and perhaps a simplicity, which is refreshing in a sense.
Yeah, and as I say in the end of the book with the adult voices, we as adults, we are all we have this experience of childhood, and we are all exiled from our childhood, and we can understand the way a child can sing the world. You know?
So let's talk about this specific child, this Gabi, and his childhood and the situation he finds himself in, because he was born in Burundi, but in one sense his identity, or not that he thinks particularly about identity at the beginning of the book, but his identity is quite mixed. So with a French father and with a mother who came from Rwanda as a refugee to Burundi. So he finds himself in a very particular position in the country, in a way separate from most Burundian children. Would you say, with his experience of life very different?
You mean between
because he has a French father and a Rwandan mother, the life he has in Burundi, would you say it's quite different from a child who, for example, would have two Burundian parents?
Yeah, definitely. And before the question of the origins is the question of a social question, because he's from a quite bourgeois neighborhood. And as you can see, his own friends are as they are. Please, let me. Je continue en français, ça va être plus simple. Ses amis sont de la même catégorie sociale.
So his friends are of the same social class.
Ils fréquentent les mêmes écoles.
They go to the same schools.
Et c'est cette différence qui est bien plus importante que la différence des origines.
Okay, so it's this difference which is more important than the question of origins. And by origins, do you mean ethnic origins?
Exact. Le fait qu'il soit français et rwandais.
Okay, the fact that he's French and Rwandan, and certainly his it gives him a unique experience as a child as well, because he sees his mother's opinion of the situation as the political situation as it develops, but also his father's position. And let's talk about his father a little bit first, because there's a moment where you write his father arrived in Africa by accident.
Yeah.
And he was there on his voluntary service, and he fell in love with the continent. Is that an experience you think in Burundi and Rwanda is quite common? There's a lot of French people that were sent there for various reasons and ended up
not
staying.
a lot, because the community of French, it's quite small in Burundi, but during the 80s and the 90s we used to have this cooperation between France and African countries. So some French arrive there like this. But je voulais surtout essayer de montrer l'ensemble de la société burundaise des années 90.
So I wanted to show the entirety of Burundian society in the 1990s.
Avec le colon belge, la communauté grecque,
the Greek community,
à travers le personnage de Madame Economopoulos.
Yeah, through the character of Madame
Economopoulos.
Thank you.
Sorry.
I could do the French. I can't do the Greek.
Les Rwandais réfugiés,
the Rwandan refugees,
la famille de Gabriel,
Gabriel's family.
Et puis les Burundais, les Congolais également, enfin, les Aïrois à l'époque.
And the Burundians and the Congolese at the time. So it was a very, very mixed society, in fact. And I think it was interesting for me, and it was an education for me to read the book on many levels, actually. Firstly, I think to discover this the diversity that existed in Burundian society in the 80s and in the 1990s. I think often it's a fault of the way things are reported in Europe.
Yes,
that we get a very one or two dimensional view of how things are. So we would imagine that all of Burundi was the Hutus and the Tutsis, and it was fascinating for me to be given a much more complex view of the society.
You know, the big city in Africa, they are the place of globalization as well. There is more link between someone who live in Bujumbura and someone who live in Paris than someone who live in Bujumbura and someone living in the countryside of Burundi. Les capitales africaines sont les lieux de la mondialisation et toutes les communautés s'y retrouvent.
Yeah, so the African capitals are globalized and all communities can be found there. And another thing that was fascinating for me was seeing how, again, from a European perspective, as I said in the introduction, how normal Gabi's upbringing was, his childhood. Like it was, whether it be children at school, some of them have the new Nike shoes and some of them don't, and that's the thing that's causing the problem between the kids. And even something which I found fascinating was an interesting reversal of what we have in Europe, is that Gabi, with a white father and a black mother, in France would be considered a black child, and in Burundi is often being dismissed as just a white kid.
Yes.
And it was just really highlighted the way that societies function are generally much more similar than they are different, whether, as you say, whether that be between Paris and Burundi or London.
Et de toute façon, le métis n'existe pas. Je sais pas comment on dit en anglais mixed race, mais je n'aime pas ce mot-là.
Yeah, we can say métissage. I don't know.
I know. In UK, you say mixed race. I remember at the library, I had to register it as a mixed race.
Okay.
Because they ask you, in London, if you are Caucasian, black, or mixed race. Yeah. So, when you are mixed race or métis, you should say métis. It doesn't exist. You are black or white. In a society, never mixed race. It's the case with Obama, for example. He's the first black president, but his mother is white.
But whether you're considered white or black depends where you are as well. So Gabi is white in Burundi.
So Gabi is white in Burundi, and black in the French society. Yeah.
One of coming back to this idea of the sort of the clarity of vision of a child, In the opening pages, you give it an explanation, so to speak, of the difference. What is the difference between a Hutu and a Tutsi? And you say, do they have a different language? And no, they speak the same language. Do they have different countries? And no, they share the same country. Do they have a different god? No, they worship the same god. And it comes down to they have different noses. And when you first read that in the opening pages, I think particularly as an outsider, you do wonder, can it really be that simple? I mean, it feels like you're joking at the expense of the differences. And yet, one of the wonderful things about this book, I think, is that it shows how the smallest differences become something big and become a space between different communities, which 99% of their characteristics broadly overlap. And I'm just curious about that. About like this, particularly putting that definition at the very beginning. As a writer, I'm curious about the decision to set up that definition.
Je voulais surtout dire au lecteur qu'il n'allait pas trouver de réponse dans ce livre.
So I wanted above all to say to readers that they would not find an answer in this book.
La colonisation a racialisé les sociétés rwandaises et burundaises.
So colonization has racialized Burundian and Rwandan societies.
Les Hutus et Tutsis étaient des classes sociales dans le Rwanda précolonial.
Okay, so all of the Tutsis were of a certain social class in pre-colonial Rwanda.
Yeah. Et effectivement, les colons allemands, puis belges, ont décidé de racialiser la population, avec d'un côté les grands au nez fin et de l'autre les petits au nez épaté.
So the Germans and then the Belgian colonies decided to racialize the communities by dividing them between those who were small with wide noses and tall with fine noses, with thin noses. Yeah.
And at the end, Rwandan and Burundian people, they integrated this physical aspect, and in 1994, during the genocide, Tutsi, the Tutsi were killed on this physical basis. They say, okay, you are tall, we're going to kill you.
One of the ways that happens in the book, in the introduction, I mentioned that moment where Gabriel is celebrating his 11th birthday, and things have already started to become problematic. Both interestingly in his family, his parents have separated, and also in the country with the political developments with the election. And there's not necessarily an equivalence in Gabriel's mind between his family situation and the political situation, but he seems to give them the same volume, if you like. They seem to register on the same level. But it was interesting to me that even after so many different things have happened, he could still have this reflection, oh, everything is going to be fine. And that does make me think more generally about politics, perhaps the political situation we're living in at the moment with the rise of the far right across Europe, across the United States, and this reaction of, oh, it will probably be okay. Obviously, you wrote this book, well, it was published in 2016, but was that something that you felt was happening also in France and in the United States already by that point? And did you consider the book, in a sense, a warning to European societies or American society as well?
Oui et non.
Yes and no.
J'ai commencé à écrire ce livre tout simplement parce que je voulais raconter, je voulais prolonger une de mes chansons.
Okay. I started writing this book because I wanted to extend one of my songs.
Une chanson qui s'appelle L'ennui des après-midi sans fin. Sorry.
Song was called the Boredom of Endless Afternoons.
Yeah, wow, yeah, exactly. Et simplement, je voulais parler de la façon dont la vie peut être aussi très banale dans un pays africain et que tout n'est pas toujours extraordinaire.
I wanted to talk about how life can be very banal in an African country, and not everything that's happening is always exceptional or extraordinary.
Et donc j'ai commencé à écrire ce roman à Paris.
So I started writing it at Paris.
En début 2015.
Beginning of 2015.
Et effectivement, l'année 2015 a été une année douloureuse à Paris avec les attentats.
And of course, 2015 was a difficult year in Paris, a painful year in Paris because of the attacks.
Et c'est à ce moment-là que m'est venue l'idée d'intégrer l'impasse de Dead End.
And it was at that moment that the idea of describing the impasse, the dead end, came to me.
Et cette impasse, effectivement, représentait dans mon idée un monde clos, comme parfois je le ressens dans l'Europe fortifiée.
And this impasse, this dead end. So we're talking this actually a physical. Gabby lives on a sort of a dead end street, like a closed street. It represented the closedness of the sort of fortress Europe that we were talking about at the time.
Avec donc cette impasse qui est un cocon.
This dead end which is a cocoon.
Et qui devient également un piège.
And which also becomes a trap. A trap in what sense?
Un piège dans le sens où le piège se referme sur lui-même.
Okay, a trap that sort of closes upon itself.
Donc à vouloir ne pas voir ce qu'il y a en dehors de cette impasse, comme nous ne voulons pas voir en Europe ce qu'il y a en dehors des frontières.
That feeling of not wanting to see what was going on outside of this street, in the same way in Europe we don't want to see what is happening beyond our borders.
Ce qui est en dehors finit par s'inviter à l'intérieur.
Because what goes on outside ends up infiltrating into the space.
Donc comme cette violence que l'on a eue, qui était déjà là, et dans le livre, c'est ce qui arrive également au personnage.
So just like this violence which already existed, entered, came into within our walls, came into Paris, and it's a similar thing which ultimately happens in the book, in the story. The violence comes into the impasse. And have you felt since the book was published, because with the election of Donald Trump, with the increased rise of the far right in Europe, with the French election with Marine Le Pen in the second round, do you think there was a part of the interest for the book to French readers was to see a similar dynamic and a similar potential consequences of what was happening here?
I'm not sure, because in this novel, what we are talking about is more symbolic, and I think the interesting aspect of the book for the young French readers, for example, after le concours des lycéens, it was to discover a part of history that they never heard about, like the genocide of the Tutsi in Rwanda, or the war in Burundi, and also a simple childhood somewhere. And in Burundi or in Rwanda, the readers, they are very happy with the book because there is all this aspect of a simple life. And I remember students in Butare, is a small city in Rwanda. They told me that they were not interesting about all the pages concerning regarding the genocide and the war, because they know about that.
Yeah.
But they were very happy with all the tricks, the story of mangoes, the story of the, how you say, circoncision?
Oh, the circumcision.
Yeah. Yeah. Because they say, we didn't realize that we can read or write something so normal in a book, in literature.
Yeah. And that's actually, in a sense, an experience that Gabby has in the book, actually, because there is a moment where he, with his Greek friend, whose name I'll let you pronounce. I think it was her who gives him the books for the first time. So she invites him into her house.
Yes.
He sees that she has this library.
Yeah.
And she starts lending him books, and in a sense, at least in sort of an emotional sense, these books save Gabby in a way. I mean, I think it's not referenced by title, but I assume the first book he reads is Ernest Hemingway. Is it The Old Man and the Sea? He talks about a man and a big fish and sharks, and it seemed to me when reading the book, it was very important for you as a writer to convey to your readers not just that this book is good, but that there's a world of books, and the books can change your life.
Yeah. La raison pour laquelle j'ai voulu intégrer cet épisode,
the reason I wanted to include this episode,
c'est parce que durant les manifestations suite aux attaques terroristes,
because during the not protests but the gatherings after the terrorist attacks,
beaucoup de gens brandissaient des livres.
Lots of people were brandishing books.
Et je trouvais ça intéressant d'avoir d'un côté les armes qui tuent et de l'autre les armes qui sauvent.
So I saw it seemed interesting to say, I saw it as interesting to have on one side weapons that kill and on the other side weapons that save.
Voilà, comme dit Aimé Césaire, les armes miraculeuses.
As Aimé Césaire would say, the miraculous weapons.
Et en même temps, ces livres-là sont le prolongement du cocon pour Gabriel.
And yet at the same time, these books are also an extension of Gabriel's of the cocoon that Gabriel lives in. So in a sense, is that a negative function they perform, or
oui et non?
Yes and no.
Oui et non. Les livres nous disent la réalité.
Books tell us about reality.
Mais la vie des hommes se joue en dehors des livres.
But people's lives take place outside of books.
Je crois que les livres lui permettent d'élargir son monde.
I think I think books allow us to expand our world.
Et ça a une fonction salvatrice à ce moment-là.
And it's a salvatory, it's a saving function of books at this point. I suppose that connects to one of the other themes of the book, which is the question of how to live with these experiences, how to live through a genocide that touches an entire country, that spares no family, and it's something which Gabriel in the book again doesn't necessarily have answers to. So you said at the beginning that there are some very brief sections right at the beginning and towards the end where we meet adult Gabby, and I think that they're even though they're very brief, they're an essential part of the book, because they again stop the reader finding easy answers. So would you just be able to talk a little bit about these particular sections and why they were important to you?
Oui. Dans les mauvais films hollywoodiens,
in bad Hollywood films,
les personnages quittent toujours l'Afrique et ne reviennent jamais. Les personnages fuient l'Afrique.
Oh, okay. Characters flee Africa
et ne reviennent jamais.
And never go back.
Parce que c'est un endroit qui finalement est un lieu de mort.
Okay, because it's an area, it's a place that is in the end a place of death.
Et je peux citer beaucoup de films
I can give you names
qui sont basés sur ce principe. Donc pour moi, il était impossible d'écrire une histoire où il n'y avait pas l'idée du retour.
So for me, it was impossible to write a book that didn't contain this idea of returning.
Et d'y inclure la question de l'exil.
And to include within it the question of exile.
Parce que sans l'exil, je n'aurais jamais écrit.
Because without exile, I would never have written.
Ouais, je pense que l'exil est le moment où, pour une personne qui est exilée, c'est le moment où on finit par perdre la personne que l'on était pour en construire une nouvelle. Et on vit entre deux états.
So for the exile, it's a moment that you lose the person that you were before, and you have to rebuild a new person from that.
Et donc c'est une période de grand questionnement, et forcément le retour est pour moi quand il est possible, est un passage obligé.
And so it's a period of asking lots of questions, and for me the return is an essential part of the book, and I think it also stops us from thinking of France or the West as the happy ending, if you like. It's because the Gabriel we find at the beginning of the book, as you say, he's rebuilt this character, but he has difficulty in his life. He feels
exactly,
and in his identity as well. He feels separated.
He's lost, totally lost,
and it reflects a little on I think of his parents' ideas that we discover during the book of what was Africa and what was France. So at a moment, his father says, when he's discussing with his mother whether they should leave, his father says, in France we are nobody. Here we have a very privileged life. Whereas another moment, his mother reflects, I just want my children to be able to live in a place where they're not afraid of dying. And it just seems there's just a fascinating question of perspective to put together in those.
Je me suis souvent questionné enfant de qu'est-ce qui pouvait faire que des personnes qui n'ont pas grandi dans les mêmes environnements puissent tomber amoureuses.
I often, as a child, I often thought about how two people who had grown up in different environments could possibly fall in love.
Je dis ça parce que en tant qu'enfant métis, on a effectivement souvent pour mon cas, des parents qui viennent de mondes totalement opposés.
I say that because as a métis child, At least in my case, we have parents who come from two completely different backgrounds.
Et je me suis toujours demandé où se trouvait l'incompréhension.
And I often asked where the misunderstandings would come from. Before we finish with questions from the audience, so if you do have a question for Gaël, get it ready in a moment. We'll ask you to raise your hand and we'll come to you. But I would just like to talk about the experience of writing the book. Because I don't want to ask sort of, how much of this is your experience and how much of it's not, because it's a novel, it's presented as fiction. I think that's sort of a sacred line. But even in your biography that's included in the book, we do know that at least some of the details overlap. And certainly, you were living in Burundi at the time that the war began, the genocide began, and your family came to France as a result of that. And I was just wondering, for you to revisit your personal memories of that time, was it a difficult experience writing that book, or was it ultimately an experience which helped you cope with your feelings about that time?
It was quite easy because as you said, I wrote an album called Pili Pili sur un croissant beurre. So at this time I've already did my therapy in a way. So this book was more, like a new pleasure of writing. You know, I used to write songs and poems on a day-to-day, and write a novel was like a new field for me. And as I was quite young and quite protected, I had not a lot of memories of this period, so I wrote a lot with my sensations. So I think is more a novel of my own sensations of childhood.
Okay, and just with the experience of moving from writing songs and poems to writing a novel, just as a writer, was it? Is it something which requires from you fundamentally the same approach? It's a different format, but it's the same approach, or is it a completely different experience for you, working on a novel and working on a song, for example?
Disons que c'est plus facile parce qu'on est tout seul.
It's easier because you do it alone.
Il y a plus de liberté aussi.
There's more freedom.
J'ai pas la contrainte de la rime ou de la mélodie.
I didn't have to think about rhyme or melodies.
Du format.
Or format.
Du single radio.
Or radio singles.
Et en même temps, le roman, cette liberté peut être effrayante.
And yet at the same time, the liberty that writing a novel gives you can be frightening.
Donc dans le Guardian, par exemple, j'utilisais cette métaphore sur l'écriture du roman et l'écriture de la chanson.
So in The Guardian, I use this metaphor between writing a novel and writing a song.
Je disais qu'écrire une chanson, c'était comme nager dans un fleuve avec les rives d'une part et d'autre.
So writing a song is like swimming in a river with the banks on either side of you.
Et le roman, on est lâché en plein océan et il faut trouver...
And writing a novel is like swimming in the middle of an ocean where you have to find somewhere to land. Okay, well, it's over to you. If you have a question for Gaël, raise your hand. I guess we'll take questions in English or French.
Excusez-moi.
Yeah.
Dehors, c'est des gens qui
Yeah.
sont avec nous.
Yeah. Give us a wave outside. There you go.
Ah oui, c'est impressionnant.
C'est jusqu'à Notre-Dame.
Ah oui, d'accord.
So if you have a question for Gaël, raise your hand. Okay, we'll begin over there. I will just repeat the question so everyone outside can hear.
So you said that you wrote the book in Paris.
Yeah.
And previously you talked about the fact that when you exile, you create a new person, you become someone new. So do you think that if you had written the book while in Rwanda or Burundi, would you have written the same book?
Okay, so quickly for people outside. So you said you wrote the book in Paris. You talked about the fact that you're in writing books, in being an exile, you have to create somebody new. Do you think if you'd written the book in Rwanda or Burundi, it would have been a different book?
No, for sure not, because so I started in 2000, at the end of 2015, I went back in Rwanda to settle there, and I started to write songs. And I was sure that, now I'm in Rwanda and I'm going to write a lot of the country, the mangos, but I was like, no, I don't want to write about this because I'm here. I prefer write about Europe, France. So I feel like I need sort of distance between me and a subject to write it. Is the I think the imagination works like that.
I think James Joyce said the same thing about when he wrote when he wrote Ulysses. He was in Paris. Okay. So you're in good company. Anyway. Okay, another question, gentleman over there. Yeah. Be careful.
You said you were in the city working in finance. Yeah. And my question is, how did you move from this charged environment and you just choose to write?
So the question is about Gaël's personal life. That he said his first job was in the city and in finance. And how do you move from a job like that to the creative profession of making music and writing books?
As a student, you just want to have to be graduate and find a job, and so but it was not my passion, and I decided 2 years after to just try. I wanted to try to release my album, and in my mind was just like an experience for 1 year or 2 years, and after I will go back to the office, and but now it's 10 years ago, and I'm still writing.
They're not still waiting for you at the office.
They're still waiting for me. I have to call them.
Who's next? This gentleman there. Yeah.
Okay.
I know this guy.
Okay.
French or English?
In English, yes.
First of all, I would like to. I'm personally very proud of you because I
Thank
used
you.
to be Gaël classmate.
Okay.
Yes.
Together in Lyon.
Yeah.
He was my neighbor in classroom, so I'm
Crazy.
really,
Thank
really
you.
moved and really proud of your time and the success in writing and music. And I confirmed that when he was at school in Lyon, he was really bored at school. He had school at that time. I was near him, so I can tell you what he was. Actually, first of all, personally, very happy to see you. It's been a long time. I was looking forward to seeing you again. And my question is the following: once I watched on your interviews on YouTube, and when your book was released in 2016, 2 years ago, you said that you didn't consider yourself as a writer because you had an Haitian writer friend, Mackenzie something. Yes, who told you that you never feel a writer even if you release one book, and that is your first one. So I want you to ask you the following question. After 2 years since a small country, you won many prizes with your book. Today, do you feel yourself as a writer, or you still only consider yourself as a singer, as a hip hop singer? How do you define yourself?
Well, I'm not going to be able to do that question justice for the people outside. But we have a former classmate of Gaël's who's just told everyone how proud he is of his friend. But the question was, on a YouTube clip from a few years ago, you said that you didn't feel like a writer. And from a friend of yours, a Haitian writer, said that you never feel, you don't feel like a writer. And the question was, now 2 years later, the book's been out, it's been a great success, you won lots of prizes. Do you feel like a writer now?
I don't think so. I think I feel like an author, but not a writer. Yeah, it takes time, I think, to know how to write a novel. It took me like 10 years before I consider myself as a singer. You don't consider yourself as a singer after one song. So I think it's the same for a novel. So yeah, but I'm on a good way. I think, yeah.
So after your second novel,
yeah, probably, or probably after the 5 or 6, I don't know.
Okay.
I think we've got time for one more question. This young lady, oh, you're close enough.
En français, ça va?
Oui.
Ok. Alors, je voudrais savoir ce qui est le plus important pour vous, parce que clairement, il y a 2 dimensions dans vos œuvres, que ce soit le roman ou les chansons, les morceaux de musique. Il y a toute cette dimension pédagogique, historique, parce que clairement, ça manque dans nos livres d'histoire, donc c'était effectivement important de l'écrire. Il y a toute une dimension historique, mais il y a aussi une force poétique incroyable. Il y a un style, clairement, vous êtes un artiste, même si vous vous considérez pas comme un écrivain, bon, un artiste, voilà. Donc, je voulais savoir ce qui est le plus important pour vous, la dimension pédagogique, engagée, politique, ou la dimension artistique. Et est-ce que vous verriez faire l'un sans l'autre? Est-ce que vous verriez faire un manuel d'histoire ou un documentaire qui serait une non-fiction? Ou est-ce que vous verriez faire de la poésie qui n'aurait rien d'engagé?
Okay, just a quick translation. To summarize, in your work, there's always often a pedagogical and historical element, and there's also, of course, the artistic element. Do you consider either of those the more important of the two? And could you imagine doing something like, for example, a work of non-fiction or history or a documentary that only uses one of those elements?
Je crois que, enfin, je suis sûr, la seule chose qui m'intéresse dans l'écriture, c'est la poésie.
I think that I'm sure that the only thing that interests me in writing is poetry.
Donc, à partir du moment où il y a de la poésie, je pourrais faire un documentaire ou un roman ou des chansons, mais j'ai commencé par écrire des poèmes à l'âge de 13 ans et ça ne m'a jamais quitté.
So as long as there's poetry in it, I could do a documentary or a history book. As long as there's poetry in it to begin with, and I started writing poetry at 13.
Yes, 13.
At 13 years old, and that's never left me.
Mais un livre d'histoire en poésie.
But why not a history book in poetry?
Ouais, je crois.
Mm-hmm. That is all we've got time for, at least of the kind of the formal aspect of this evening. As usual, we will be serving wine afterwards, so I hope you'll all hang around, have a glass to drink. Of course, we have plenty of copies of Small Country available at the till, and I'm sure that Gaël will be happy to sign them for you. It's been an absolute pleasure. So all that remains for me to say is please join me in thanking Gaël Faye.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you.